If you don't know me, I'm Pastor Brad. I am grateful that you're here with us, either in person or online. We have spent the last 3 weeks trying to find a definition to that is based out of 1 Corinthians 13. And if you're unfamiliar with the Bible or kind of how that's organized, a lot of the last part of our Bible are letters written to people in the time immediately following Jesus's stay here on earth. And it was letters from leaders, from what we call apostles and others, to help people understand what it meant to live a Jesus-centered life. And in this, the Apostle Paul, he is a major leader in the early church. He is writing to Christians in the area of Corinth and saying, this is what it means. This is what it means. He actually steps them through this is what it means to be an authentic community together. And he actually says, and I want to show you now the most excellent way of being a community that loves one another and loves Jesus, that is following after Jesus. And then he takes chapter 13, and it's all about love. Again, we talked about the fact that this is often quoted at weddings, and it does apply there, but it's so much broader than just weddings. So I want to start with a quote, and I am going to butcher the name, although it is famous. But I was looking around for some more definitions for love. And here's what I ran into. This is from Fyodor Dostoevsky. That sounds right, right? Okay, he's Russian, and he's actually a Russian Orthodox author who wrote Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov. There's a bunch of things he wrote, and here's what he said. To love someone means to see him as God intended him. I thought that was so insightful and really wrapping in so much of what we've already talked about when it comes to this idea of what love is according to the Bible, according to God's standard. It's an others-centered thing. It's seeing someone else through those eyes of redemption that God can give us when he cleans us up from our muck and our dirtiness that we walk through. And if we can begin to see others the way God intends them to be, both where we can help them and as God's ideal for them would be, that's going to change how we interact with them. So like I said, we've been walking through 1 Corinthians 13. And we have taken 3 weeks already and made it through 4.5 verses. I told you we were slowing down here from the speed we normally go through. But this is coming, this is answering that. What's the most excellent way of being a real authentic community? It's to love well. And we started with the idea of what love illuminates, what love sheds light on, where it shows the motivations behind. And we read this: if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, if I deliver my body to be burned, the idea of being a martyr even, but have not love, I gain nothing. That all the stuff I do in life, if it is done devoid and divorced from love, it accounts for nothing. For me, for others, for who I am, it is nothingness without love. Well, then we kept going and we looked at 3 words for our week 2. And we talked about what love lauds, what it lifts up. And we said that we talked about the fact that love is patient and that it's kind. And the patience doesn't just mean this like meek whatever, like it doesn't matter what happens, you'll just kind of sit there, but that you have an intentional willingness to walk through the difficult parts without losing it, being able to keep that purpose in front of you. And the idea of kindness is that it's in many ways the opposite of being a mean person. That if you're known in the world as a mean person, you're not doing the kindness of what God is asking for us to do as those who are loving. Last week was fantastic. I was blessed with a week where I didn't have to stand up here, and you guys got to listen to Curtis. And I was incredibly blessed and encouraged by his willingness to do that. And he led us through what love leaves, or what love leaves behind. That if you're going to pursue patience and kindness, there's certain things you have to let go of. And that is the idea that love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. And he really hammered in the idea of how these things all relate to kind of pride. Do you remember him talking about that? Well, and I have to say, he kind of put me on the spot and did what was a little embarrassing to me and quoted me in front of all of you. So I'm going to return the favor. I'm quoting for you Curtis Fisher from last week. I thought this was a brilliant, brilliant quote. He says, "Pride takes up the space where humility should be." That is rich and that is deep and that is biblical and that is Jesus. That's the Jesus way. We are to step into humility, and humility is not beating ourselves down. You know, this self-deprivation thing, that's not humility. What is humility is seeing myself rightly through the eyes of God, of not elevating myself above others, but lifting others up. I don't have to beat myself down to lift others up. And that's why this is all done in the context of community, because when everyone is trying to lift up everyone else, who gets left on the bottom? No one. That's the beauty here, but so often we'll push out that humility when we let pride take a seat in our hearts. And if you read those highfalutin theology textbooks and all that stuff, you know, the really, really smart Bible geeks, you know, the ones that were way smarter than me, they'll talk and track back to what was the first sin of humanity. And if you ask most people that have any connection to the church or the Bible, they'll probably say when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, right? Remember when that happened in the garden? A few of you, you're looking really... Do we need to do some calisthenics? Get some blood flowing here? Okay, so that's the thing that will usually be said, the fruit. But most of these theologians will say, no, the sin actually happened before that. The sin was the sin of pride. That Adam and Eve would say, my opinion, my belief, my desires, my wants are better, more important, higher than the creator of the universe. And though he said no, I say yes. That pride was the first thing that shattered the perfect, sinless creation that God made. That is so important for us to understand. I think we're going to keep seeing that as we keep digging in. So last week, Curtis walked us through what love has to leave behind. There's so much that we actually had to do a part 2. Okay, so we're doing what love leaves behind. Again, there's a few more things that as we read 1 Corinthians chapter 13 that love leaves behind. So let's look at the rest of verse 5. It says that it does not, or love does not, insist on its own way, that it is not irritable, nor is it resentful. Love does not insist on its own way, love is not irritable, and love is not resentful. If I'm going to pursue what love has me pursue, which is kindness and which is patience, amongst other things, like a beautiful thing that Curtis brought out last week again, was that what we're looking at is not an exhaustive definition of love, but a exemplary one, that these are key and important components of what love is. And if love lifts up kindness and patience, I have to leave these things behind. If I don't leave these things behind, I cannot pursue kindness and love. So what does it mean to insist on its own way? Love doesn't, and by the way, when it's saying it's kind of this way of saying, hey, if you're going to be loving, you're not going to insist on your own way. Okay? So let's personalize it. If I'm going to love, I'm not going to insist on my own way. Interesting words here that make up these terms that we're taking a gander at today. The first one is zeteo in the original Greek, and it's the idea of insisting. It's the idea of you're striving for it, even more than just a, hey, yes, I really should have it. It's a pursuit of. It could be used as I quest for. Right? Like, I will go through this epic campaign of life in order to achieve, and then what is the end? Well, the end is the word hetu, which is a reflexive pronoun. Look at that. Bringing back the grammar my mama taught me as an English teacher when I was like in second grade and got made fun of by all the other kids because I used words like reflexive pronoun, okay? So it's a reflexive. It's looking back to oneself. So itself, yourself, they self, himself, those kind of things. Love does not quest for itself. That's really the idea. We could also say it this way. It's to endeavor for myself. If I'm going to be loving, The main pursuit of my life cannot be me. And I got to tell you, living in the world we live in today, that's a tough one, because do you know what the world kind of around us tells us to do? Take care of number one. Take care of yourself. Make sure that you're okay. Now, and I want to walk a narrow little trail here, a fine line, as it were, because that doesn't mean that you have to hate yourself. That doesn't mean that you don't ever care for yourself. There's real wisdom in the fact that when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant does that thing that we all ignore because we've all heard it before, and they talk about when those life masks pop down, the oxygen masks pop down. If you're traveling with a kid, what are you supposed to do first? Attach yourself first. What? You ignore your child? Yes, because in the time it takes you to secure yours, you are then able to appropriately help others. Yes, we do. We are to be others focused, but there are points where we have to make sure that we are being filled up. I get that. But we usually don't really struggle to think about ourselves. Usually, it's the hard one to say, I need to step beyond just helping myself and care for others. That's what this love is saying, or this piece of love, is that I will not endeavor solely for myself. And we see this actually earlier in 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, so before 13, before that part of 12 talking about community, Paul says this in chapter 10, verse 24, let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. And then he jumps down a few verses later and says, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved. Paul set the stage already that what it means to live a Jesus-centered life, a Jesus-following life, is to make a priority about seeking the good of others, questing for others rather than questing for myself. The second word in this verse, though, was irritable. This one's a little easier. It just really means to provoke or to urge strongly or even to provoke to anger. But it is a passive, and it's something that's being done to you. So if you're loving, you will not be one who is made to be angry or easily angered, some of your translations might have if you're following along. And it is really the idea of to be provocable. I don't even know if that's a word, but I'm using it. Have you ever heard the phrase, don't poke the bear, right? Has anyone heard that before? Few of you, okay. See, Norma's waving back there because she's like, yes, I'm that bear, don't poke, right? No, we say that, if you jab at this person, they are gonna get back at you. It's like literally poking a real live bear. That's not a smart thing to do, because what do we know the bear is gonna do? Gonna maul you, gonna bite you. It's not gonna be a good situation, because the bear is known to retaliate, to easily turn on whoever's doing this poking. The idea here is that we should be the opposite. We should not be known, if we are truly loving, as those who, man, if you say anything to them, they're just going to lose their ever-loving mind. You can't talk to them about that because they'll just lose their cool. That is where this word moves us to. This idea of love is that we can, and it makes sense when we're told that love is patient. What do we have to leave behind? The easy provoking to anger, right? If we're going to be patient, we have to leave that behind. And then lastly, this idea of resentful. And this one is super interesting. If you're unaware of this, the Bible wasn't written in English, right? Most of us are aware of that. And it didn't drop out of the sky in Elizabethan English either. It actually came in the form of a couple languages, primarily Hebrew and Greek with a little bit of Aramaic. And what we do is we try to translate those languages. But the Greek in particular is a form of Greek called Koine Greek. And the Koine Greek was conversational, and it was kind of like a bridge between ancient Greek and what we have today as modern Greek. What the problem is, nobody speaks Koine Greek today. It's what's considered a dead language. So some of our translations, we try to get around and get our best sense of it, but it's not like you can just go to Greece and they could just tell you, oh yes, this is what this means. So our translations, and we have a whole host of them, kind of get at this from a bunch of different angles. Here, in the English Standard Version, what I usually preach out of, it uses the term resentful. Do you know what the New International Version uses? Does anybody have that with them? What does it say? Angry. All right. There's another one that says, keeps no record of wrongs. Keeps no record of wrongs. And I love the English Standard Version. I think it's a great one to look at. But that translation is actually a little bit closer to what the actual Greek is. See, this is actually resentful is actually two words. It's logizomai and it is kakos. And it literally means to credit or reckon as, and then the second word, evil. The idea is like somebody sitting down with a ledger and writing people's names at the top and then jotting down everything they've done wrong. Okay? That's the word picture at play here. So I understand where resentful comes from, because if you're keeping a list of, everything wrong that everybody else has done, you're going to end up being pretty resentful of that, I think. But this is just saying here, and I stole this a little bit from a guy named Bill Mounts. He wrote some of my Greek textbooks back in the day. He said, it's to set down as a matter of account that something is injurious to me, meaning they owe you because of this. You sinned against me, therefore this is what you have to do to make it up. It says, love does not keep track of wrongs like that. Now, as a caveat, again, this doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries. This doesn't mean that I can't keep track of it, so if every time I walk into Starbucks, that barista punches me in the face, I have to keep leaning over the counter every time I go in. That's not what it's saying. But if you know of a Starbucks like that, you should really shop somewhere else, okay? This idea, though, is that you can have boundaries, but you don't hold this over their head, and it's particularly a relational idea, that I keep forcing you to make good and pay this off. And it's really based in who Jesus is and what he did. Let me share a little parable. And just part of a parable, because it's a longer one in Matthew 18, where Jesus is talking about what the kingdom of heaven is. And in the book of Matthew, this is the gospel account, the good news account of the disciple Matthew, of who Jesus was and what he did. Chapter 18. We read, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. See, we're kind of talking about the same stuff here. And it says, when he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. This is a ridiculous amount of money. That talent was, I believe, a year's wages. So what was it, 1,000? So 10,000 talents. So 10,000 years of a yearly daily worker's wage. There's no way he could ever pay it back. That's what this figure is thrown in there for. And it says, out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him that debt. Beautiful picture of forgiveness, by the way, as well. Because we think, forgiveness means nobody has to pay for it, right? No. In this example, where the master forgave this huge debt that the servant had, who had to pay the debt? The master bore it on himself. He said, I will take this loss. I will pay it instead of you. That's a beautiful picture of forgiveness and mercy. But it keeps going, and it says that when that same servant, the one who had been forgiven, went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, which was a very small amount of money. We're talking like, 20 or 30 bucks. And it says he seized him and he began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. Then his master summoned him when he heard this and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? This is a picture of what God does for us. God forgives us, and out of his forgiveness, we can then forgive others. It doesn't mean that what someone else did isn't terrible, nasty, and horrible. And somehow we kind of live in this world where you have to prove to me that you're forgivable before I'll forgive you. Unfortunately, that's not how God forgave us. See, all of us would be up the proverbial creek without a paddle if we were stuck in the situation where we had to prove to God that we were worthy of his forgiveness before he forgave us. Do you know how many of us would be forgiven if that were the standard? 0. So if we can be forgiven like that, God calls us to forgive like that, then if we are going to love like Jesus loves, we're going to keep no record of wrongs. We're going to let go of that resentfulness. Well, what do we do with all this then? How do we actually leave these things behind? Because I'm guessing not too many people in here would argue with too much of what I've said so far. All right? If so, I'm happy to chat with you when we're done here, or you can leave a comment online and I'll get back to you. But I think most of us would say, okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from. What do we do with that? How do we leave any of these things behind? And I want to say, first of all, there is no magic bullet, no simple 1, 2, 3-step plan to get you there. This is a lifelong pursuit. Paul was writing to people who had already chosen to follow Jesus. If it was just this natural thing that anybody who's a Christian or anybody who follows Jesus would do, Paul would not have to say, okay, now here's how you have to do it. It was clear that people would need this, would need to be reminded of this and push into it. Let me share a quote with you from an author and a therapist. Her name is Andi Kolber. She writes this: it's important to understand that we prefer, as people, we prefer familiarity over actual safety. I know how to adapt to what's familiar. I'll go to that. And the idea there is, she's talking about people who have endured trauma. And they want to stop acting a certain way, but because they've become so used to how things are, even when they can say, oh yeah, that would be better, they return to what they're used to because they're familiar and it feels safe. Let me tell you, I have seen that in my life, and I have seen that in the lives of virtually everyone I have tried to help in any way over all the years of my time in ministry. People will return to what is familiar because it feels safe, even when you can even recognize that it's not. And if we know that we are to pursue kindness and patience, it's easier to fall back to what's familiar, to what we've used to protect ourselves, than to actually let go of it and move to the good. Even if we can acknowledge it, it's hard to do it. And she goes on to say, we will repeat what we don't repair. So these things, we can't just go, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, I should do that. But you know, life's life. It is what it is, and we just kind of coast past it. We give it just kind of a nod. We give it oh yeah, I agree with that. But don't actually try anything different. We will simply continue to repeat those same mistakes. We'll continue to repeat those patterns of life that bring pain and agony and suffering and trauma into my life and into the lives of others. So if we're going to be loving, what do we do? What does it look like to leave these things behind? I want to suggest a very quick 5 ABCs for you. And I cheated a little bit because they don't all start with the letter I'm giving them to. So work with me. The first one is to ask. What do I mean by that? I want to say that just like we started today off with prayer, if we really want to be the kind of people that love the way Jesus loves, that loves the way God wants to love, we have to put ourselves into the presence of the one who has already demonstrated that love. We have to go back to it again and again and again, even as Curtis and I were working on his message that he shared last week, weeks before, and I'm walking him through the process, and I said, okay, so when you started looking through this, did you pray about it? He's like, no, that would have been a good idea. I said, yes. So what he started doing, when he started devoting his process that I gave him to walk through, each time he was doing it, he said he was starting with prayer. And he said the difference it made with understanding and clarity and the impact on his own heart was revolutionary when he did a simple thing of asking God to be in the process, inviting God and stepping into God's presence. If you want to leave behind the things that are against love, ask God to be in the process with you, because we can't do it on our own. The second is bend. What do I mean about that? Intentionally bend your behavior towards kindness and patience. Start with that. Think intentionally when you do things. Is this kind? Am I being patient? And none of us will be perfect, and we understand that. But the arc of our life, if we're loving, will be towards kindness and patience. So literally ask yourself that question. Think through it. Don't just go through the motions because you're used to it. Am I being kind? Am I being patient? C is commit. And this is the idea of radically committing yourselves, meaning, well, I know this is going to be hard, but to expunging selfishness and pride from your life. Be willing to make very, very clear-cut decisions, very clear-cut boundaries on your own life about whether or not you're being selfish. If there is a hobby in your life that means you cut other people out and aren't willing to engage, maybe you need to let go of that hobby. Maybe you need to restrict it. If you're using technology for things that are unwholesome or harming to others, things like pornography, maybe you need to get accountability software on, or maybe you need to say, you know what, I will not use a device when I'm in a room by myself. Do the radical things to take steps towards removing selfishness. Don't make it about you, make it about others, but it's a commitment. It can't just be an intention, it must be a commitment. Because when those temptations to just do it for yourself, to insist on yourself, to quest for yourself come up, if you haven't made a commitment, you'll just give right in to those repeated patterns that you haven't repaired. Second, lastly, do. Here's the real specific, tangible challenge. I'm asking you for the next week, and then perpetuate it onwards after that. But do one other-centered thing every day that you don't have to do. Meaning, if it's your job to maybe be a Starbucks barista and you hand someone their coffee, that doesn't count, right? Oh, look, I did it for them. I gave it. No. Go out of your way to do something that's not part of your regular, your normal, what you normally have to or would do, and serve someone else. Do something just for them. Maybe it is when you're at Starbucks. I'm really hitting those Starbucks references today. Pay for the person behind you if you're in a position to do that. You know, when you take your trash out this week, knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, can I take your trash out for you? Do something for someone else to intentionally move. Do it. Don't just make it an internal thought-based thing. Do something about it. And then lastly, I want you to examine. I want you to examine yourself. I want you to invite others to help you examine. Because we tend to think we're all doing okay. We tend to think that, oh yeah, I'm not being selfish. Oh yeah, I'm being kind of others. But we need the input of those around us to help us see where maybe we really are being selfish. Maybe I'm not being as kind and as patient as I can be. And that can be a vulnerable thing. Let me tell you, I'm a parent of young kids. It's a vulnerable thing to ask somebody, hey, am I doing okay with my kids? Am I being kind and patient with them? Because then I'm giving them permission to look in the eye and say, no, man, you're not doing the best there. You got to try some things. That's a hard thing. But if we want to move away from the selfishness and pride, move into kindness and to patience, we have to give others permission to look into my life and speak into it. We do that with our life groups, with our various other groups that meet at different times. If you are not part of a community where you can have someone speak into your life that way, I strongly encourage you to do that, because it will make all the difference in moving away from selfishness and pride and into kindness and patience. Now, we are going to sing a final song, so I invite you, as you're able, to stand with us as we wrap up this morning.